Tanya Woo, why are you running for the citywide council seat?
Oh, I got my start in community, basically. I've built affordable housing. I've volunteered for a community group called Community Watch, being on the front lines in encampments, trying to help connect people to services and resources, also helping our elders. I organize things like senior escorts, as well as senior self-defense. I run a small business in the Chinatown International District, and really saw what happens to communities when their voices are not heard. I always believe that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. There are a lot of high impact issues that were happening around the community, and trying to organize voices of community to go to City Hall, go to King County Hall, and realizing there's a lot of barriers in place for people to actually reach out to government, to have access to government resources. And so I ran to represent the city that I love. I grew up here, and to really try to bridge that gap and try to help reach people who are furthest away from government.
How has your experiences living and working with your family businesses in Seattle shaped your objectives when it comes to tackling public safety and crime?
Yes, I think our biggest challenges, there are many, but when it comes to trying to get to safety, I think it's going to take all of us. It's going to take community members. It's going to take the city, especially. And so I think first and foremost, let's talk about we need more officers. We need to be a fully staffed police department. And I'm the only candidate who is wanting that because, 4 or 5 years ago, while we did not defund police, we demoralized the police department, and 600 officers left the force. Everyone is now in patrol. We have a couple of detectives, but we need more detectives to be able to help get guns off the streets. I think we need more officers. We'd love to get to a spot where we can have more community policing. We could have a graffiti unit. We could have a unit to help small businesses. I think there is a lot of things stem from us not having enough officers out there. We also need the alternatives to policing, such as the care team, which is something we're really excited about, expanding that program citywide, as well as community groups like We Deliver Care, Urban Family, Community Passageways, all these groups that are violence disruptors that are out in our community building trust, I think is very important as well. And groups like my group, volunteer groups, and I think that involves empowering and uplifting community members, especially, and how do we help uplift and empower neighborhoods as well. So that's something I am working on currently, is how do we scale that to the entire city to have volunteer groups be able to do that. I think it also helps with young people. How do we allow for our young people to be engaged in activities that ignite their passions and their interests? How do we allow for more funding for community centers and libraries so they could stay open longer? We could have late night basketball, which is what kids want. How do we help with entrepreneurship, apprenticeships, as well as how do we help people start businesses? So I think it's going to be a whole host of things that will get us to community safety. But basically, if our kids are safe, our families are safe, and our neighborhoods and cities are safe.
When you talked about overnight violence and the possibility of keeping some nightclubs open between 2 and 5 when a lot of this violence happens, shootings involving that demographic. Your opponent had criticized that, saying you don't really have a full plan to make that work. Do you have a plan, and how would that help prevent overnight violence?
Yeah, so illegal nightclubs that are open between 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. comprise of more than 10% of the city's violent crime. If you have seen, there have been many shootings inside and outside these illegal nightclubs. And so basically what I'm doing is gathering a community stakeholders group. Many people who are part of that group are nightclub owners. Many are surviving victim family members. And so trying to come up with recommendations on legislation that we could implement to help make these after-hour nightclubs safer. Currently, I mean, we don't want to shut them down, but we also want to be able to make them safer. How do we allow for officers to be able to go inside these nightclubs? They cannot currently. Do they have a safety plan? And making sure that all those things are applicable, possibly, but we have to make sure it goes through a community stakeholdering process and that everyone's voice is being heard and considered. And so that's what we're doing right now. Next month, we're going to do the rulemaking, and hopefully we can introduce this at the first committee in December.
I wanted to touch on tackling the fentanyl crisis. Last year, the DEA removed 4.8 million lethal doses of fentanyl across the state. Obviously, we've seen the impacts here in Seattle. What more can the city do to tackle the fentanyl epidemic?
Oh, I think we could do a lot more. As someone who's out at 12th and Jackson, 3rd Pike and Pine often, I've administered Narcan, I've performed CPR on a lot of people who have overdosed, from young people trying drugs for the first time to elders who didn't realize that they bought their drugs on the legal market because they couldn't afford their drugs in the pharmacy. And it's just devastating. Every death of a young person, of an elder, we have failed, basically. And so I think we could definitely do more. I mean, we see hundreds of people on 12th and Jackson, 3rd Pike and Pine. This is an opportunity. People need resources to fight their addiction. This drug is so devastating because it really changes who you are and how you can process information. And so I would love to see more mobile clinics administering addiction drugs such as buprenorphine, Suboxone, to get people to a right state of mind where they can make decisions for themselves. And so I also believe we need more teams of people with lived experiences out there trying to build trust between people to allow for people to come on inside or to get the help that they would like. It's all consent-based. So I think that's very important too. I mean, like I say, it's going to take everybody. It's going to take city resources. It's going to take people on the ground in community and small businesses to all come together to help build that trust to get people to come inside. Because a lot of the time when I'm interacting with folks on 12th and Jackson or 3rd Pike and Pine, you get the sense of not the poverty of things, but of connection and this hopelessness that they're not seen. And so we can let people know that we see them, we care about them, that they should care for themselves, and hopefully work in partnership with people to get them to a place where we can help.
A lot of voters want to know, how do you address homelessness?
Oh gosh, that's going to take many, many things. And it's not just the city, it's county, it's state. I think first and foremost, we really need to stop people from getting to that point of being unhoused. We need to make sure that there's protections in place and a safety net to help people. And I think that's removing stigma, that's removing barriers to get help. There's this young lady who reached out to me. She's a jewelry maker, but her electricity was turned off, so she couldn't make jewelry. And so working with her and letting her know that there's resources on being able to help get assistance with paying for your electricity or paying for rent. I think that's really important, and making sure that's also in the budget in the city. And in terms of people who are at that point where they are unhoused, how do we activate support networks to help people, especially build that trust? We of course, have to build more housing to allow people to come on inside. I love tiny house villages. We have tiny house villages in the budget and are trying to fund more tiny home villages. And that's what everyone's asking for. A lot of people just want a door. They don't want to go into car and get shelters. But how do we get people to a point where they can accept shelter and wraparound services especially? A lot of people need that extra help to get to where they want to go. My building, the Louisa Hotel, which we helped rebuild, housed 20 formerly unhoused individuals. And so I think it's also going to take public-private partnerships such as that. Because a lot of people who come into Louisa who are formerly unhoused need that help and wraparound services. Someone didn't know how to work their heater and started a fire. So how do we help people? And I think it's going to take all levels of government. It's going to take organizations and people working together, and a multi-plan response. And of course, right now we're looking at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority in leading us in those efforts. There has been missteps in the past. I'm sure you know my opponent. used to work there, she wrote the 5-year plan that would have cost the city, or not the city, but would have cost nearly $12 billion to be able to build all that housing. And so we need realistic goalposts. We need a plan that we can achieve. And we also need to make sure that we center this around people and really do that outreach and engagement and find out what root causes are.
Why should voters choose you over your opponent?
Yes, experience especially. I grew up here in Seattle. My family immigrated here in 1887, but because of the Exclusion Act, I am the first generation that was actually born here. And so I experienced the legacy of redlining, of segregation, as with many people in South Seattle have. I've seen what happened to our neighborhoods that don't have a voice. I'm part of one of the most endangered neighborhoods in America. I have a small business there. I'm a small business owner, a neighborhood restaurant, and I'm a person of action. I saw that we needed more public safety initiatives, so I helped start the Community Watch, which helped many neighborhoods in South Seattle. And we're still going strong. When I saw that there needed more housing, I built affordable housing in a historic building. I've also have been really engaged with my community in making sure that people are being heard and leading people into the halls of power to try to teach people about the government process, which is also, I think, something that people who are new immigrants or refugees don't know how to do. They come from countries where government has persecuted them. So how do we build that trust? How do we tell people what resources are available? So I think experience is one thing. I'm from community. I know my opponent, most of her career and her life has been spent in the King County Regional Homeless Authority, working in governments at the UW. And so I offer that perspective from the ground level, being in encampments and trying to help connect people to services. I think the second thing that we contrast on is our public safety and how we approach public safety. I believe we need a fully staffed police department, and we need the alternatives like the care team, We Live or Care, community passageways groups that I've been working with. I think that's really important. It's a balanced approach. It's not based on ideology, it's based on results. People will love an answer to their 911 calls. And yet, we need to make sure that we have the right response to the right situation. And not every response needs a gun and a badge. And so how do we make that happen? That's something I'm interested in. My opponent believes that we don't need to recruit officers, that she would like to see more alternative response. And I think we need both, basically. Another thing that I believe we differ on is our approach to homelessness in terms of sweeps. And I believe that our city approach is working. We could always do better, but this is what we're working with currently, and we do contract with the King County Regional Homeless Authority when it comes to washed-out properties and other areas as well. But we need more accountability. We need to make sure we base everything on facts and on data, and not on ideology, basically. So I think we differ on a lot of things. I also believe one other thing that we differ on is in terms of how we approach policy. I think we need to make progress, we need to move forward. We cannot go backwards. A lot of the policies that have happened in the last 4 or 5 years that have taken us to where we are today have not really worked. It has failed our marginalized, our vulnerable communities. And so how do we make sure going forward that we center approaches in politics around people, we make sure there's stakeholder groups that are being heard, and that we see what has worked, what has not worked, and are able to pivot.
Any final parting thoughts that are important for people to know?
I think a lot of my campaign has been about uplifting people, uplifting voices. I don't believe in order to uplift others, we need to tear people down. So I think it's listening to communities, going out to communities that are not aware of government processes, and making sure that they understand and are heard. There are a lot of resources out there, including things like rebate programs, assistance when it comes to Seattlelite or utilities. And how do we make sure that people are aware that that's available? Something I'm working on also is making sure translation is there for people. A lot of government resources, a lot of things people need assistance on. It's another layer of another barrier when you can't understand, if you don't speak English. And so how do you make sure that we're trying to reach out to communities furthest away from government to let them know that, you know, we are here, we want to help, we want to build trust, and we have to work together to get to our common goals.